I walked into the Baltimore Harbor and Sail Club in a $9 thrift store dress and shoes I'd resoled. Twice. Champagne-colored carpet. Cathedral-high windows. The doorman glanced at my canvas tote, smiled the way people do when they don't know where to file you. By dessert, the general manager would call me Madam Chair. My son's in-laws would learn how expensive condescension can be, and I'd keep my voice exactly where it lives, low, steady, uninterested in applause. 4 days earlier, my son called, "Mom, can you do me a favor?" His fiance's parents wanted to meet me at this club because they'd heard I was simple. At the table tonight, they offered me $700 a month to be comfortable, to call less, to disappear. They called it help. I call that a price for absence. Then the room turned. A manager stopped by. "Ms. Ellis, thank you for chairing the Culinary Bridge scholarships and for the refrigeration grant." Forks paused. Faces changed. Titles matter to people who mistake kindness for accounting. I didn't raise my voice. I opened a folder. Compliance flags. Contracts rerouted. Margins replaced by people. And one rule I never break. The staff eat first. If you think this is a story about money, it isn't. It's about scale, dignity, and what happens when power doesn't shout. It lifts. Stay. Because before this night is over, the most expensive thing in this room will be a lesson. On Tuesday at 4:12 p.m., my phone rang between first period and after-school tutoring. Ethan doesn't call during his workday unless something is wrong or about to be. He teaches 10th grade American literature at a public school in Canton, the kind that survives on the patience of teachers who still believe that a well-placed poem can outshout the world for 90 minutes. "Mom, can you do me a favor?" he said, soft, like he was holding a glass and a soccer ball at the same time. "You only ask that question in that tone when you have already tried 2 other people," I said, and I could hear him smile without seeing it. "Tessa's parents are visiting from Greenwich this weekend," he said. "They want to meet you." Saturday night, the Harbor and Sail Club. They made the reservation. "Please, come?" "Do they know anything about me?" He waited long enough for me to hear the machines in the teacher's lounge. "I told them you work with food distribution, that you live modestly, that you're simple." There was the word. I let it sit between his breath and mine like a dropped spoon. "Okay, kid," I said. "I'll be there." After we hung up, the kitchen returned to its original soundtrack. The kettle sighed. The old fridge coughed. Someone 2 doors down laughed like she was trying to teach her walls new words. My row house on the edge of Highlandtown was the size of a memory, painted with colors I could name with my eyes closed. I stood in the doorway and looked at the room that had raised a boy and a life. Laminate counters that look better at sunset, a stove that preheats when it feels like it, wooden spoons that remind you to stir slowly, a scar on the table from the time Ethan tried to iron his camp patch without understanding heat. I can afford more. I don't own more. That distinction has been my favorite secret for most of my adult life. The world knows people like me by our titles or our outcomes, never both. The title is Senior Vice President of Operations at Quanta Relief Logistics, a company that moves food when the weather remembers its teeth. The outcome is a series of quiet victories no one posts about. Warehouses humming at 3 a.m. while cable news counts casualties. Convoys crossing state lines while the talking heads pronounce the phrase supply chain, like they've only ever seen it printed in bold. Volunteers who show up because they can't stand watching the same commercial about suffering one more time. I have not been a millionaire since college. The money came later through a series of promotions that crept up like sunrise. The salary covers comfort. Discipline buys freedom. I own both because I learned early that applause is a currency that evaporates the second you try to spend it. When Ethan was little, I worked 3 jobs, 2 of which were honest about what they paid. Mornings, I stocked shelves and smiled at people who thought it was my fault we were out of their favorite cereal. During school hours, I was Miss June at the elementary cafeteria, hairnet, plastic gloves, blue aprons so thin it hurt to think about grease. The kids said thank you with eyes that knew hunger is a shape long before it is a word. At night, I took classes at the community college because numbers don't argue, and logistics is a kind of math that loves a single mother with a stubborn spine. I didn't tell Ethan my salary when the promotions arrived. I didn't tell him about the bonuses when they did. I did not tell him how much it costs to sleep without debt. I kept my life small enough to carry with one hand because I wanted him to grow up looking at people's faces, not their furniture. He grew up anyway. He fell in love with a girl who did debate, who could explain a brand strategy the way some people explain a symphony, who wore polish as lightly as other people wear freckles. Tessa is kind. Tessa is also the daughter of people who believe kindness should be measured on a scale that can be zeroed out with a receipt. On Saturday evening, I dress like a woman who remembers the cafeteria schedule without checking a clock. Cotton dress the color of old wallpaper, shoes that had learned my feet, canvas tote with a packet of tissues, a knitting project I never start, and a folder tucked behind the yarn. When I looked in the mirror, I recognized myself immediately. The trick is not to look poor. The trick is to look like no one invited you to be impressive. The taxi smelled like wintergreen gum and something clean that had earned its reputation. The driver's hands were the color of stories. He kept his eyes on the road, but his voice turned the weather into a conversation partner. "Harbor and sail?" he asked. "Yes." "Fancy," he said, not unkindly. "They serve water in glass. They also charge you for the idea of it," he said. I laughed, and he smiled like he'd won a dare. The club's entrance hums with money that has never been told no. Brass handrails and marble tables, thick as arrogance. A young man in a jacket that fit better than honesty asked for my name and then decided not to need it. He opened the dining room doors like he was introducing a bride to a family who would pretend to be surprised. Ethan saw me first. He has my cheekbones and his father's habit of apologizing with his eyebrows. His relief at my arrival flashed across his face and then dropped when his eyes made it to my tote. He swallowed, stiff the way you get when you realize you are trying to be two people at once. "Mom, you made it. Here I am." Tessa kissed my cheek the way you do when you are deciding whether to hug. She smelled like an idea, expensive and polite. Her eyes did what her face didn't, moving quickly, measuring distance, hunting a place to set me down where nothing fragile would fall. Her parents sat near the window, a skyline at their backs as if they owned the view. Patricia Caldwell wore emerald silk and a smile practiced long enough to be muscle memory. The diamond at her throat looked like a small confession trying to pass quietly. Her husband, Graham, an event impresario with teeth the color of money, held himself with the stiffness of a man who irons his posture. "A pleasure," Patricia said, mechanically precise, holding my hand the way you hold an instruction manual you don't want to read. We sat. The waiter arrived with menus that weighed as much as truth. The print was small. The language pretended to be French. Prices had agreed to keep a low profile in exchange for being high. "Do you need help with the menu?" Patricia asked, the way you ask a child if she tied her shoes. "I might," I said. "I don't speak French as fluently as some." She nodded toward the waiter without looking at him. "She'll have something simple." "Simple," I said, putting the word on my tongue to see if it tasted like what she meant. Patricia started with the litany required by her species. The flight from Westchester was long. The hotel in the Inner Harbor had a suite with a view, but the other suites were better, and everyone knows that corner rooms create corners in conversation. She spoke in numbers, nights, rooms, square footage, wine vintages, none of which I ever count. Graham asked me what I do for work after we had learned how much the steak cost and why it was worth the price of a small mortgage. "I work in food distribution," I said. "Scheduling, paperwork, coordination, simple things." "Admin," Patricia concluded, smiling the way someone smiles when they finally find a file in the cabinet. "Honest work. Every role matters." "Of course," I said. That's how shelves stay stocked and freezers stay cold." Tessa said nothing. Her fingers folded her napkin into increasingly tiny shapes, the way you do when you run out of sentences that won't embarrass your parents. The waiter brought wine like an announcement. Graham told me about the vineyard as if he had planted it himself, as if his hands remembered soil instead of spreadsheets. Patricia cut her steak 1 measured inch at a time and said the number out loud, maybe so I'd know, maybe so she could taste it twice. Some people wear money the way children wear a costume. Too big, sleeves dragging, asking everyone to notice. Patricia wore it like a uniform, which is its own kind of costume. We had almost made it through salad when Patricia folded her napkin and looked at Ethan the way committee chairs look at budgets. The waiter hovered. She waited for him to move out of listening range, which is a circle much larger than people like her believe. "Since we're all family now," she said in a voice shaped like hospitality and control, "we wanted to discuss something sensitive. Just to be helpful. Helpful is the prettiest word that has ever put someone in a cage." I set my fork down. "Ethan is such a good man," she continued, "but marriage is pressure. We've always believed our children shouldn't carry unnecessary burdens. At your age, living alone, on a limited salary. Well, we thought perhaps we could offer a small monthly allowance. Nothing extravagant, just $700. So you can be comfortable without leaning on Ethan. Ethan's jaw drew a line I hadn't seen since he was 16, and his father didn't keep a promise. Tessa's napkin stopped moving. $700, I repeated. In exchange for what? Patricia blinked, as if I had failed to applaud at the right line. For ease. So Ethan can focus on his marriage. So you won't call as often, drop by, or ask for help. So we're clear, I said. This isn't about comfort. It's a price for absence. Graham leaned in, his voice lowering in the way men's voices do when they want to be reasonable and powerful at the same time. Don't misread. We're pragmatic people. Stability is love. Sometimes, I said, and sometimes it's control-wearing jewelry. Silence landed on the table with the soft sound polished silver makes when it stops moving. The harbor pressed its face to the windows. The room decided to listen, even if it pretended not to. "I admire your philanthropy," I said after a minute. "Tessa told me your foundation funds arts programs." Patricia straightened. "Smiles are a currency. Theirs inflated on schedule. We have a gala every spring. We raised just over $1 million last year. What percentage of gala proceeds reaches programs?" Graham blinked. "We have people for those details." "What's your overhead rate?" I asked. Patricia frowned. "What an odd question." "Odd," I said, "or inconvenient." Ethan's hand moved toward Tessa's. Tessa let him find it. Under the table, her fingers braided into his, an answer she didn't say out loud yet. A man in a navy jacket approached quietly the way people walk in rooms where the floor remembers bigger secrets. The club's insignia was stitched on his blazer with thread the exact color of old blue uniforms. He paused at our table and turned toward me with relief disguised as formality. "Ms. Ellis," he said, "I'm so sorry to interrupt. I wanted to confirm tomorrow's walkthrough for the Culinary Bridge program. The staff is honored you're chairing the scholarship board this year. And, thank you, for the refrigeration grant. The kitchen is ecstatic." The table rearranged itself without moving. Patricia's smile faltered like a chandelier losing a bulb. Graham's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Ethan stared at the manager and then at me as if some neighbor he'd always known suddenly showed up in a uniform he had only read about. Tessa's mouth opened and didn't find words for a moment. "Tomorrow at 10, I said to the manager. "We'll keep it under an hour. And please, tell Chef Marisol I brought my own hairnet. Old habits die hard." He laughed, the good kind, bowed slightly toward the table, and left like a man who had just managed to deliver a message before it turned into a headline. "Chair," Patricia said slowly, as if testing each letter before allowing the next one into the room. "Scholarship What? The culinary bridge, I said. We fund training for local youth, kitchen work, management tracks. The club donated space, we supplied equipment. We're opening the program citywide. Graham found his voice where he had left it, somewhere between entitlement and disbelief. Our events company pledged in-kind support for that program. That was generous, I said. I saw the pledge. His shoulders unlocked a fraction. We're proud to be part of it. And the invoices that followed, I said, with an 18% elite venue surcharge for students who wash the plates. That was creative. Nobody moved. The room continued its performance. A spoon clinked against porcelain. A woman laughed 2 tables away. Somewhere near the bar, a glass gave up and broke quietly. I didn't raise my voice. I don't know how to do that anymore. Decades of trucks and spreadsheets and disaster relief have cured me of volume. What I learned to keep instead was ballast. Earlier, I said to Patricia, you offered $700 a month so I might shorten my shadow. Thank you. My salary covers my quiet. I keep my life simple because peace is an expensive instrument and I prefer to own it outright. We didn't mean, she began. You meant well for your daughter, I said, but kindness that needs a receipt isn't kindness. It's accounting. Graham tried to adjust the scene. Look, whatever this is turning into, we respect your charity work, but let's not confuse volunteer committees with business. You're right, I said. Let's not. I set my toad on the table, opened it, and slid a thin folder toward him. No flourish. Paper should never be theatrical. It already has too much power. Tomorrow, I said, Culinary Bridge signs a multi-year food distribution partnership with the Maryland Community Food Bank. Those contracts used to route through your events group for plated galas. New model, direct procurement, worker protections baked into terms, community over chandeliers. Your preferred vendor status will sunset in 30 days. The club board voted this afternoon. The word sunset softened the blow and made it more complete at the same time. That's the thing about polite vocabulary. It cushions edges without moving them. Graham's face cycled through the colors a man wears when news happens at the wrong table. We've been the club's exclusive caterer for 15 years. And, I asked gently, and you think you can replace us? I know we can, I said. We're not replacing your people. We're replacing your margins. Patricia stood so suddenly, her chair scolded the floor. Heads turned. Money hates to be witnessed when it is undressed. This is outrageous, she said. You invited us here to humiliate us. You invited me, I said, and offered me money to be quiet. The humiliation was already on the menu. You just assumed I'd be the one eating it. A dishwasher in a crisp white coat slipped through the service door and caught my eye. We nodded at each other the way working people do when they see one another on the wrong side of a dining room. It's not a secret handshake. It's a short, grateful look that says, I see you, I know you, and I'm on your side even if you never know my name. Mom, Ethan whispered, eyes bright. Why didn't you tell me? Because you didn't need my ladder, I said, turning to him. You needed your legs. There is a certain relief people experience when the truth shows up, even if it is unwelcome. The room felt it, the way a car feels the correct gear. The manager returned, apologetic again, holding a different kind of message like a tray he couldn't put down. He leaned toward Graham, using a voice that carries a door with it. Mr. Caldwell, the board liaison asked me to inform you that the compliance review flagged several labor items at Caldwell events. For now, the club is pausing new bookings with your company. We'll honor existing contracts. I'm sorry to deliver this at dinner. Graham stood so fast that his chair tried not to fall. This is absurd. The manager kept his hands behind his back, the way old schools taught boys to hold anger until it grew up, and learn the difference between heat and light. We'll meet Monday morning. He turned to me, allowing light back into his voice. Ms. Ellis, Chef Marisol asks me to tell you the citrus zesters arrived. She says she'll never again use a microplane meant for a dollhouse. Tell her she'll never run out again, I said. Patricia looked like a woman who had prepared an entire soliloquy only to be told she was auditioning for a different play. We built our life on this club. Then build it again, I said, without the parts that wobble. I pushed the folder toward her. Inside, you'll find resources for compliance, a list of independent auditors who fix this in months instead of years if you let them, and a note about wages. Pay your people before you pay your image. She looked at the folder like it had fangs. We don't need your charity. This isn't charity, I said. It's a mirror. Keep it or throw it away. Either way, it still reflects. The waiter hovered with the check, eyes doing that careful thing people in service do when they realize they might be mistaken for furniture. Put the staff meal on mine, I said, handing him my card. All of them. Tonight, Patricia lifted her chin. We can pay our own bill. Of course, I said, but you won't pay for the people you didn't see. Out in the lobby, the harbor pressed against the windows like a promise it might keep if the weather cooperated. Ethan walked beside me with his hands in his pockets the way he did when he was 12 and wanted to ask for forgiveness without the burden of a formal request. Are you angry with me? He asked. No, I said. I'm proud that you invited me even when you were afraid I'd be myself. He laughed and then did the thing grown men rarely do in public unless they are standing next to someone who loved them before they earned their muscles. He wiped his eyes. Tessa stopped near the door and looked like herself for the first time all evening. Without the practiced smile and the predictable nods, she was just a woman who had made a series of decisions and was about to make a different one. June, she said, quiet. I'm sorry. I grew up in rooms where people confuse etiquette with kindness. I should have spoken sooner. You spoke when you were ready, I said. Use that voice often. The taxi driver who took me home was the same one who had brought me there, which felt like a coincidence, but was probably just a function of timing. He glanced in the mirror and decided I was the kind of passenger who wanted to be asked exactly one question. You all right back there? He said. I just told the truth at a table that prefers pretty words, I said. He chuckled. Truth's heavy, but it travels. A minute later, he asked, Are you rich? It wasn't rude. It was honest the way thunder is honest, arriving in the tone that makes the question sound less like a challenge and more like a curiosity that refused to die quietly. Depends, I said. Money, yes. Peace, finally. Time? Never enough. But tonight I'm rich in silence. That's my favorite currency. He nodded, satisfied. People who got it don't need you to know. The row house looked the same as it always does at 9:30 p.m. Lights like warm coins dropped into a jar, shadows where familiarity keeps its secrets. I made tea because victory is loud and I prefer quiet companions. My phone buzzed on the counter, a number I didn't recognize. June. I'm ashamed of tonight. I want to learn. May I visit you, not as a daughter-in-law performing goodness, but as a woman who wants to be better? Tessa. Yes, I typed. Wednesday morning. Wear shoes you can walk in. On Sunday morning, Ethan called before the bells at St. Leo's finished their first optimism. He sounded like a man who had survived a storm he thought he could dodge. Mom, I went back to the table after you left, he said. They were waiting for the manager to come back with different news, as if the next sentence could unsay the one before it. Tessa told them she was ashamed. I told them I wouldn't let money buy my boundaries. How did they take that? I asked. Like people who have never heard the word no in a language they understand, he said. They called it ungrateful. They called you manipulative. They said they were reconsidering their will. Ah, I said, the conditional love clause. Tessa said that if their love comes with a codicil, they should send it to her lawyer, he said, proud and afraid at the same time. We're going to set rules. No comments about money, no attempts to make us feel like we owe them for existing, no bribes disguised as allowances. If they can't respect that, they get distance. Good, I said. Distance is kindness when closeness is a weapon. Mom, he said, and his voice turned 12. Why didn't you tell me any of it? The board, the money, the grants. You never needed the information to become who you are, I said. You needed the absence of it. He sniffed and then laughed at himself for sniffing. I love you. I love you more, I said, because some reflexes should never be unlearned. On Wednesday, Tessa arrived in sneakers, hair pulled back without the extra hair that says there's an event later. The morning had decided to be kind to Baltimore, the harbor gleaming without pretending to be anything but water. We walked the waterline past joggers who look at strangers' strides like they're thinking about form. Tessa kept her eyes forward. I grew up in rooms that made me good at compliance, she said. You don't realize what it costs until the receipt comes decades later. What did it cost you? I asked. My sense of scale, she said. I learned to measure people with the wrong ruler. We sat on a bench while gulls auditioned for our attention, with the kind of screaming that would be considered impolite if it came from a person. An older woman took pieces of bread from a paper bag and tossed them into the air like confetti. The birds forgot all their grief for 30 seconds at a time and then remembered it, screeching like they had invented hunger. You know, the woman said without looking at us, the birds don't ask who baked the loaf. They just share it. Humans complicate the giving. True, I said. True enough to remember, she said, and kept tossing bread like blessings. Tessa told me about prep school galas where 7th graders were taught how to hold forks and opinions at the correct angles. She described a debate coach who taught her to take a breath when she wanted to pounce, not to restrain herself, but to choose a better angle. She confessed that for years she had stood between her parents and the world like a translator who begins to forget her first language. She cried once, quickly, easily, like someone unlearning the portion control that passes for composure. You don't have to be your mother, I said. You can love her and break her rules at the same time. What if she calls that betrayal? She asked. Then she's naming her own fear, not your choice, I said. Love that demands you be someone else isn't love. It's Elise. Tessa laughed the kind of laugh that scares away a little of the dark. Ethan said you have lines like that hidden all over your house. I keep them behind the flour, I said. If you bake enough bread, you get to keep the quotes. On Monday morning, we sat in a conference room that smells like expensive rectangles. The board's legal counsel wore a tie the color of compromise. The compliance team laid out a plan built with binders and short timelines. Graham stared at a point in the middle distance like a man who had just remembered a phone call he forgot to make 10 years ago. Patricia sat very straight and found the place on the table where her eyes could rest without admitting anything. This will be painful, the auditor said, not unkindly, but not as painful as the lawsuits would be if you ignore it. We've always taken care of our people, Patricia said, which is what people always say when their people carry bruises you can't see on a spreadsheet. Then put it in writing, I said, with teeth. They signed to show the room that they still believed in signatures. Whether they believed in change was tomorrow's problem. The work did not end at the harborside table. It never does. It continued in warehouses where forklifts sing lullabies and pallets stack themselves in my dreams with the efficiency of regret. It continued at the food bank where the director and I drafted terms for contracts that would do what they say they do. It continued in kitchens where Chef Marisol taught a 19-year-old how to hold a knife without hating it, how to salt water like a prayer, how to tell the truth with a plate of eggs. I talk about food a lot because it has been my favorite language long enough to count. Food does not brag. It does not require applause. It asks for exactly what it needs, heat, time, patience, and then delivers exactly what it promised if you do not rush it. Months after the dinner, we held a ceremony in the club's kitchen that felt more like church than the club's ballroom ever had. Chef called names, hands wiped on aprons that never become truly clean, certificates framed by people who had never owned their own picture in glass. The students didn't look toward the harbor when they held their papers. They looked at the stovetops where they had learned to coax warmth out of metal. One of the dishwashers from that first night came up to me, shy and proud at the same time. "Ms. Ellis," he said, "thanks for the zesters." "Thanks, Chef," I said. "She fights for knives. I just buy them." He laughed. "My mom would like you." "Tell her I like her already," I said, because it felt like the truth even if I never met her. Patricia and Graham did not come to the graduation. Tessa did. She stood behind the students, eyes wet in the way people's eyes get when they realize they have been standing in the wrong room for years and finally found the right one. Ethan hugged kids who have learned that some teachers arrive in a day suit and others arrive in a denim jacket, and both kinds can save your life if they remember your name when attendance stops counting you. I did not forgive Patricia and Graham in a ceremony. Forgiveness is not a trophy you hand out at the end of an 8-week program. It is a habit that doesn't always like you back. I do not know if they changed. I do know that my son and his wife built a home that does not require receipts for love. I know that when the phone rings in my kitchen now, I answer it without wondering whether it is another invitation to a performance. I know that the harbor looks most honest in winter when the tourists are gone and the gulls commit to their complaints. Sometimes I think about the first time I lifted a tray of Salisbury steak in the elementary cafeteria and how heavy it was and how every kid who passed my line said, "Thanks, Miss June," like saying thanks was a spell they wanted to practice until it worked on their whole lives. I wonder if those kids remember the smell of the kitchen the way I do, steam and bleach and whatever love smells like when it is tired and still shows up. There is a photograph in a drawer I open no more than twice a year. It is of Ethan at 7, holding a library card with both hands as if it might float away. His hair sticks up like a question mark. He looks the way people look when they discover that a door they thought belonged to someone else swings open for them too. I keep money the way I keep photographs, out of sight, labeled in pencil, left to do its work without performing. Once in a while, someone tries to make a spectacle out of it. In those moments, I remember that wealth is not what you spend in public. It is what you don't have to prove in private. On a rainy Thursday, I took a cab across town. The driver had a rosary on the mirror that clicked on sharp turns. He asked me if I was visiting someone or leaving someone. I told him neither. He nodded in a way that made it clear he believed me and also knew I was not in the mood to recall every name I've ever left behind. When we reached the warehouse, the forklifts sounded like wails. The rain made the roof sing. A man named Cal, whose hands are twice the size of mine and twice as gentle, lifted a pallet like a promise, set it down and said, "We got the Houston load out in 9 hours. You were right about the route." "I'm right sometimes," I said. "You're right enough," he said, which is my favorite compliment because it respects failure without giving it the last word. On my way out, one of the trainees from Culinary Bridge stopped me in the hallway, where the air smells like cardboard and intention. He tapped the wall like he was reading the building's pulse. "Ms. Ellis," he said, "when we do the big dinner in May, will you come?" "If they feed me, I'll come," I said. "We'll feed you," he said. "We know how to salt water now." Outside, the rain had turned to a kind of mist that felt expensive. The city looked like a postcard it would never send. I took a breath and thought about how many rooms there are where people try to buy the right to speak first, and how many rooms there are where people earn the right to speak by listening. If I have a religion, it is that second room. There aren't many mysteries left in this story. People want one more reveal, one last twist to make sense of the parts that are still sore. The one I will give you is a small one, the size of the distance between 2 fingers when you almost touch them. A week after the dinner, Patricia sent an arrangement of white flowers so large it made my living room look like an apology on a stand. There was a card. "We overstepped. We are not used to being told. We are learning, slowly and poorly. If you are willing, we would like to try again one day in a room where no one needs to be impressive." I did not respond that day. I waited a week. Then I wrote a note on plain paper with a pen that runs out of ink if you press too hard. I prefer rooms where the staff eat first. There is no epiphany at the end of this, except the one you make yourself. My son loves a woman who loves him back in a language that does not need receipts. The club's kitchen trains kids who will open restaurants where the menu says good morning in butter instead of numbers. The city keeps breathing. The harbor keeps pretending to be a mirror for people who need to check their teeth. My canvas tote wears out exactly on schedule, and when it does, I buy another one. If you catch me at the right hour, you might see me standing at my kitchen window, tea in hand, learning the light again. And if you ask me what I learned that night at the club, I will say something I have known since I was a lunch lady in a hairnet, counting cartons of milk. True power doesn't raise its voice. It raises people. When you raise enough of them, the rooms that once tried to buy your silence have to learn to hear without you. One evening, months later, I walked past the yacht club on my way back from the food bank, where we had just approved the budget for the next quarter's deliveries. The lobby glowed the same way it always does. A couple in navy blazers negotiated the entry like it owed them a favor. Through the windows, I could see Chef Marisol gesturing with a knife, the way maestros wave their batons. We have our own room now, in the kitchen, for the trainees. There is a bulletin board where names go up when a student lands a job, because people should see their futures written before they get there. I stood under the awning for a moment, watching the harbor do its hair with the wind, and thought about my mother, who did not live to see any of this and would have called the club that fancy place near the water. She taught me to carry dignity inside even when the outside made other people uncomfortable. She taught me to keep my secrets the way I keep my sugar, in an airtight container, shared generously, traded carefully. She would have liked to see the moment when the manager called me Madam Chair, and Patricia realized that the rules she'd been taught were not the only rules in the room. But my mother would also have noticed the dishwasher slipping a plate into the rack with a small, tired flourish. The kind of flourish you allow yourself when you've done a thing 10,000 times and it still matters to you. She would have said, that's class. I went home and boiled pasta because pasta forgives you for almost everything. I tossed it with olive oil and garlic and ate it standing up the way I used to when the table was covered with school projects and my own homework. Then I sat down, finally, at the same table, now scarred with the life it has carried, and wrote a list of names. Not a guest list. A list of people who needed a call, a forklift operator whose ankle was healing, a trainee who thought she wasn't management material because her voice shakes when she gives instructions, a food bank driver whose mother was sick, a teacher who had stayed late to call parents without the energy to answer. Lists like that are a kind of wealth, not the kind you can deposit, the kind you invest in by showing up and checking boxes with a pen that does not run out of ink because you learned a long time ago how much pressure to apply. The next morning, I woke up before the sun without needing an alarm. Years of early deliveries taught my body what my phone still pretends to do. I made coffee like a ritual I inherited and stepped onto the small back stoop where winter air licks your cheeks until you remember you are alive. The city sounded like itself. Garbage truck complaining, bus sighing, a jogger's shoes forgiving the sidewalk for being so steady. My phone pinged. A picture from Chef, the board in the kitchen with 3 new names under hired this week. I thought about those 3 pairs of hands holding papers, shaking hands, sending texts to people who would say, "Proud of you, kid," and mean it with their whole mouth. There are nights when I still hear the club's dining room in my head, the tinny clink of forks, the percussion of glassware, the way money makes a room echo like a cave. But it does not make me angry anymore. It makes me tired a little. Then it makes me hungry, which is better. Hunger is an honest teacher. It asks good questions. It does not confuse the taste of butter with the presence of love. It divines the difference between a bribe and a meal without making a speech about it. Sometimes people ask me if I regret not flaunting what I had when I could have. They ask it with kindness or with a smirk, depending on whether their own closets are full of clothes that feel like costumes. Here's the answer I carry around like a spare key. I did not hide. I chose. I chose to learn the names of the cashiers at the grocery store. I chose to tip the man who fixes shoes like he was the last tailor for dignity. I chose to buy citrus zesters for a kitchen instead of a watch for a wrist, not because I am saintly, but because zest makes more things possible than gold keeps you company. Ethan sometimes introduces me to his students when I visit his classroom. He tells them I move food like an orchestra moves sound. He tells them I can parallel park a refrigerated truck and calculate a route that saves 12 minutes and $1 a mile. He does not tell them my salary. He tells them I taught him to read receipts and people, and to believe that the second category is always more interesting. He brings me in when they read Steinbeck, which is an old tradition that tastes different every year. We talk about dignity and grapes and the price of things and the price of things. A boy with a hoodie pulled over his ears asked me last week why we still do soup kitchens in a country this rich. I told him that the country is not the thing that matters. The kitchen is. He said that sounded like something a person says because they're tired of being disappointed. I told him he was probably right, and also that some of the best meals I have ever eaten were ladled by hands that had no reason to believe the world would ever repay them. This, then, is the ending you get. A kitchen that smells like onions and olive oil. A harbor that refuses to be anything but water. A young couple building a home that keeps its doors open to people who come without receipts. And a woman who still keeps a canvas tote because it is the right size for a folder, a knitting project, and the kind of power that doesn't shout. If you need a line to hold on to, try this one. Wealth is how many truths you can tell without losing your peace. That night at the yacht club, I told enough of them to walk out with my head up and my heartbeat steady. The next morning, I told the same kind of truths to a warehouse that already knew how to believe them. The day after that, I told the truths to a young woman in sneakers who decided to be herself in shoes that allowed for walking, not just standing still. And tonight, I'll tell them to my tea, which prefers silence but accepts confession. I don't know if Patricia and Graham will ever learn to love without a ledger. I don't know if their foundation will ever post the overhead rate on their website. I don't know if anyone in that dining room remembers the night the manager said Madam Chair while holding a tray full of consequences. I do know the dishwasher remembers the zesters. I do know Ethan and Tessa learned to choose distance like medicine and closeness like dessert. I do know a boy in a hoodie will grow up to ask good questions at a public meeting and refuse to be talked out of them by someone with a better suit. When the wind is right, I can hear the gulls fussing even from my kitchen. They are not good singers. They do not try to be. They just make their noise and remind the harbor that it is not all yachts and glass. It is birds and fish and air that does not care about anyone's last name. It is a mirror for the sky and a workplace for people who do not get invited to the ballroom unless they bring plates. It is, like all beautiful things, best when you remember what lies beneath it. I once thought I would end my story with the sentence about true power and then let the credits roll. But there is one more thing that belongs here, almost too small to notice. A list of things I keep on the inside door of my pantry. It is written in pencil on a torn envelope. It says sugar, salt, flour, tea, names of people to call, truths for hard rooms. Underneath that, one last line, eat with the staff first. I do not cross that line out when I've done it. I rewrite it on the next envelope. Some habits should never look finished.